Hello and welcome to What It Takes. I'm Tom Landon. On this program, our ultimate goal is to inform our viewers about area organizations and the issues facing our communities, and this program promises to be both educational and hopefully enlightening. While it is Roanoke City-centric, the lessons my guests are learning definitely apply to all of us. In 2021, gun-related homicides in the city of Roanoke were up by 400% over the previous year, along with a marked increase in aggravated assaults. While crimes do tend to fluctuate year to year, the trends are quite disturbing, which is why we decided that the topic warrants more than one episode of What It Takes. In our first program, we'll look at some of the reasons for the current crisis and meet with two people who are trying to help our community address them as a whole. And in our next episode, we'll talk to two people working our streets to help victims and potential perpetrators alike change the narrative. My guests today are City Councilman and Gun Violence Prevention Chair, Reverend Joe Cobb, and Chris Roberts, Gang and Youth Violence Prevention Coordinator. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Tom.
And I hope I got those introductions correct?
You did.
Yes. Okay, great. As we start to set the narrative and talk about what the issues are, first of all, let's just talk about what the scale of the problem is. Joe, maybe just you can start. Just why is this such a pressing issue right now?
Well, when I first became aware of this as a new council member, it was during one of our community safety updates from the police chief. And in 2019, we were beginning to see a rise in homicides as well as aggravated assaults. What we didn't anticipate, of course, was COVID. And we didn't anticipate that we would see such a significant increase over the last 2 years, but particularly last year. And one of the things that's been troubling about the increase is the number of incidents that we can connect with some kind of domestic dispute. They may not be identified precisely as domestic violence, but oftentimes these incidents were over arguments that were based in relationship, whether it was a boyfriend or girlfriend, or in some cases it was retaliation for someone talking about somebody else. And the tragedy is that rather than resolving these conflicts in healthy ways, someone picked up a weapon and shot somebody else, which resulted in serious injury and, as we know, far too many deaths.
Right, and what are your thoughts in terms of, like, when did this become, reach your view that this was becoming a really, really big problem?
I have to agree with Mr. Cobb. 2019, we saw an increase. Again, you're talking about petty beefs and petty arguments being handled with gun violence. And seeing that definitely put it high on my radar to be a part of something that can be able to address those issues.
This is a big thing for even a city the size of Roanoke to tackle. It seems like it's systemic across America, but is there something, is Roanoke, is it worse than areas? Or is there more going on here in terms of this kind of violence?
It feels like there is because of the size of our city and the impact. I mean, every time we have one of these incidents, it's on the news. The police report it out. And it feels like it's a larger problem. And it is in many ways, because over the last year in particular, we saw an expansion of these incidents occurring in more parts of the city. While the predominant, I would say 75% of the incidents are occurring in Northwest, we saw an increase in Southeast Roanoke. And we actually saw an increase in Northeast and parts of Southwest, and we saw a few more incidents downtown. And so the concern is, why is this happening in other sectors of the city? And then why is most of it happening in Northwest? Right. And what can we attribute that to? And that's why the Gun Violence Prevention Commission, our sole purpose is really to look at those root causes and identify prevention and intervention and response measures that look at the long-term solutions that address the root causes. Because we know if we do something that's more of a Band-Aid or a quick fix, it's not going to ultimately reduce the incidents that we're seeing in the long term.
And this, I'm guessing your view is it's not something we can arrest our way out of or get the bad actors out of the arena. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement. I mean, to arrest our way out of something like that, this is not the only way to address it. It's a part of it, of course, once we identify those individuals. But as Mr. Cobb spoke to, we have to get at the root of it. And the root of these issues are bigger than just arrest and stuff. And so we have to work together as a community, to empower folks to be able to handle overarching issues.
And how about just the prevalence of weapons? I mean, in earlier times or in other places, people might settle some of these petty disputes the old-fashioned way, right? But now when you introduce guns into it, it's a whole different ballgame. What are your thoughts on kind of just the number of weapons that are out there?
Well, we know that there are just an extraordinary number of weapons that are out there. I think over the last couple of years we've seen a significant increase in gun sales, which the majority of which are legally purchased and not used in violent ways. But we see far too many weapons getting into the hands of people either through theft or someone's just handed them a weapon or a gun that's not been stored properly. One of our homicides, a child this last year, died as a result of handling a gun that was not stored and was not locked. We just had an incident this week of two people who got in a fight at a body shop, and one of them took out a gun and shot the other in the back several times. Now, he's going to survive that injury, but as Chris said, we've talked to countless people who decades ago said, if we had a beef with somebody, we worked it out, but there was never a weapon drawn. And so something has clearly shifted culturally, not only in Roanoke, but in our nation, about the prevalence of guns, the access of them. And I read a story recently where there's a big uptick in what are called ghost guns, where parts are pulled from different sources and pieced together in a home. So someone will order the parts and then literally put the gun together in their home.
Wow. And so this effort is obviously too big for, we talked about the police. I mean, they're certainly interested in this. I know the schools are interested. Let's just talk about the partnerships that the task force is trying to pull together.
Sure. When we're out here in the community trying to meet people and do the grassroots effort, you have community leaders, people who are outspoken in their own respective communities that are willing to come to the table, to talk, to walk, to participate as a mentor, to educate individuals. You have youth service providers that are coming to the table and saying, hey, how can we help? How can we get people access? How can we build skills to conflict resolute as opposed to, resorting to violence? So we have a lot of resources in the community that people are talking, and some people are actually doing good work, but they're doing it in their own silos with their own cases and their own clientele. But we want them to open up and let the residents know we're a block over and we're willing to help, we're willing to guide, we're willing to teach and educate you on better methods on how to be a better citizen in your neighborhood.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Tom, that one of the early efforts of the Gun Violence Prevention Commission, this is kind of the most formalized body that's appointed by City Council, but prior to that we had the Task Force to Reduce Gun Violence and a study committee to reduce gun violence. And during that time, we began to bring together community stakeholders, mental health providers, social service providers, youth advocates, after-school programs, Roanoke City Schools, just over 100 community partners. And then we expanded that when we focused in specifically on youth service providers in the community to conduct our first ever youth and gang violence community assessment, which we just completed and we've just received the summary of, and we're eager to dig into that and see what came of that. But we had good response to that. As Chris said, it was not only because of those community partnerships that we've established, but because residents and youth are really interested in this and want their voices heard, and they also want to be a part of the solutions.
There was a sense, as somebody who's lived in Roanoke for a long time, there there was a time when we had a police chief who sort of denied the existence of kind of organized crime here, gang type things. It seems like there's been a shift in thinking. Is that true? And I know you say a lot of it is related to domestic and personal violence, but there's also an element that there are gangs in Roanoke, correct?
That's correct. That's correct. But there's been a shift, and that shift, I recognize that there are pockets, there's groups, there's gangs, there's all types of people creating this violence, and be able to identify that and know that, then you can kind of strategically map out your plan on how to address those specific areas and issues.
Are there other places that are doing things like this that Roanoke City is able to, learn from, collaborate with? Joe?
Yeah, we've certainly studied other cities that are much larger than ours. What we've come to discover is that we're actually kind of leading the way in terms of Virginia localities. Because of the infrastructure that we worked to develop over the last 2 years, we were able to apply for some significant funding and receive that, the Gun Violence Intervention Program grant that actually allowed for us to hire Chris and 2 outreach workers, and for us to conduct the community youth assessment. And this summer, actually this fall, we were asked by the Department of Criminal Justice Services in the state to present a webinar on the work that we've been doing. So we have drawn from other cities. We continue to do that. We want to find ideas and best practices that truly work for Roanoke. And the idea may come from another locality, but we've got to make it unique to Roanoke because Roanoke is a unique community.
And I would think that because Roanoke, while we think of, it's the largest city around here,
Correct.
But yet it's still not difficult to get into a neighborhood and find out who's who and who your leaders are. And is that a big part of what you're doing?
That's exactly what myself and my team are doing now. We want to know exactly how and who is doing the good work, where the holes at, where the gaps at in services, and link those two. It's almost like we look at ourselves as the Swiss knife of services in the community to figure out how do we build gaps and bridges so people can get services across the city and then help build our community from the inside out. And so we're talking to people, whether it's residents, whether it's librarians, whether it's clergy members, whether it's youth service providers, whether it's agencies. I'm knocking on doors and talking to whoever they tell me to talk to make sure that people have access and willing to have these citizens get access to those services.
And it's easy to see statistics, see numbers going up. Certainly we know that when someone is killed by gun violence, that we know what the impact is there, but what are some of the other impacts just on families, communities, when one of these incidents happens, whether someone is killed or whether they're injured, or, and I'm also thinking of the person who does the shooting. Let's just talk about why this is such an important issue.
It just rips away at the fabric of the community in and of itself from us not coming together. It just continues to push us that much further apart. And when people don't feel like they have a voice to express their hurt, their anguish, their concern, if they want to help, it just makes these gaps that much more bigger. And so what we have to do is make sure that they have their voices are heard. The survey that Mr. Cobb spoke about, now you have an actual tool to express your feelings and not be judged, and you can do it anonymously and say, look, these are the concerns I see in my community. These are the things I think we can suggest to help, and put it out there. And we'll look at those things and make our plans a little bit more strategic, geared around addressing those concerns. What's been very important for me, and I guess eye-opening for me, and my experience in working with court-involved youth and young people, I only kind of worked from that side of the aisle. On this side of the aisle, I'm able to work with the victims. I'm able to work with the community who are impacted by that, as well as the perpetrators of these crimes. And it gives me more of a holistic view that each one has to be addressed, and they all have to have voices, have their voices heard, so we can eliminate this issue.
And Joe, what you see as somebody who is a member of the clergy and who is, how do you think this overall issue is affecting us beyond just the event itself?
I think that we have to consider the trauma that this creates. It's not just the act of gun violence or violence in general that creates trauma. but it's the residual effects of trauma and how that is multi-layered and really intergenerational. So when Chris is talking about, you know, the person who is injured or the person who died, you immediately have to think about, well, who are they related to? Who are their family members? Who are their neighbors? How far does that reach go out? And that ripple effect is extraordinary. And so one of our key focus areas has been creating opportunities to make the community more aware of what trauma is, how to identify it, how to respond to it, but then also increase access for individuals and families to receive trauma counseling without barriers. And so one of the gaps I think we're finding is that sometimes that access to mental health care is not as readily available as it might be. And so part of our challenge is to figure out how to reduce those barriers so that someone who needs that help, we can get them connected with it immediately.
And of course, COVID, you know, we haven't done a show yet this year where there isn't a conversation about how COVID's affecting it. In this case, I'm sure, let's first just talk about how the fact that people have been more isolated may be making the problem worse.
That's exactly right. I mean, with the COVID, you don't have access. You don't necessarily know if you want access to people coming in your home or you're going to people's office. So now that puts you more of at a disadvantage to suffer in silence, you know, and not have your trauma needs met because you're not trustful of, am I going to put myself in more harm's way given the uptick in COVID or just the current crisis that we have nationally?
Well, I think we saw when COVID first hit in March, April, and things were shut down, there was a decrease in everything. But as soon as things started to open up again, we started to see that increase in violence. And I think, although I can't verify it with evidence, what I can say is that I do believe that what happened to people during that time of isolation had an impact on our mental health, on our socialization, on how we respond to anger, how we release it in healthy ways or not healthy ways, and what we do with that. And so I know that there are studies underway and we're bound to see those unfold over time, but the effects of COVID on our mental health and our physical health has played an extraordinary part in not only the uptick in violence, but in this general kind of feeling of frustration and anger, and in some cases rage. And so how do we help our communities and our people respond to that in healthy ways and not in ways that lead to violence?
And then I guess the other side of the COVID equation here is it's made your jobs more difficult, right? It's hard, you can't bring your whole community together in a gym to have conversations. So how have you all worked to, and I know that your part of this isn't as old as the task force or anything else, but how are you trying to work to bring people together in ways to get your message out without being able to actually, you know, have them in community face to face as often?
Sure. I mean, right now, I mean, myself and my team, we're working with the Reset team. We're knocking on doors. We're going to their communities after these traumatic events have happened and knock on doors and meet people where they're at. Of course, we have our mask on, we're social distance, and we're in open air. So we don't want to just not have, you know, these meetings or have these conversations. We want to make it as convenient as we possibly can for those citizens in those communities. So we go there and we want to make them comfortable by talking to them outside of their door in open air spaces.
And you mentioned the Reset team. We're going to talk with some folks from the Reset team, but what is that and what's their role in this whole process?
You want to explain that?
Well, it's a rapid response team that was made possible initially through a grant, a federal justice grant. We were able to hire a coordinator, Lloyd Merchant, who works through the police department, and he's pulled together a volunteer team that's extensively trained. And they go out in teams whenever there is an incident, and they try and go to if there was a household involved, to that household, to surrounding households, to that neighborhood, to check in with people, to find out if there are resources that they can connect these individuals and families and neighborhoods with, and then make those direct connections. One of the, I think the last count we had was that they were deployed out 37 times last year to multiple sites around the city to make those connections. And what's been significant about that is the relational approach. This isn't, checking in on anybody. This is building a relationship with people in the community to hear how these incidents of violence have impacted them, where they need help, how they need help, and how to connect them with the help that they need. And then a follow-up process that takes place in that.
And, since I was a kid, and especially in my community, which isn't everybody's community, but when we thought of the police, they were helpers, as Mr. Rogers likes to say, look to the helpers, right? But there has been a shift in some communities about, attitudes toward the police and whether or not you're going to reach out to them. And I know the police have had difficulty in several trials here locally when they can't get anybody to come forward after an incident. What's the role in the task force and the reset team, especially in sort of being a buffer there?
Sure, I know I've experienced it with myself firsthand by being a part of the reset team in several different communities over the last 90 days. And matter of fact, before I came here, I was on a walk with those guys. And so Mr. Merchant does a great job, and he and his team let them know we are stationed in the police building, but we're not police officers. We're not sworn officers. And it makes it clear if you have something to share, then there's a hotline to, to call that in. But I'm here to check on you, to figure out, are you okay? Do you need services? And here are the services we can provide. And if there's anything you want from that angle, he will coordinate and get those people access to. It's been overwhelming to see people talk, be willing to talk to him and his team, to tell them the needs, the things they see in their neighborhood, and to get things fixed. There's been several occasions where there's been stuff broken in the home or not functioning correctly, or trees that residents were concerned with. Mr. Merchant made calls, Roanoke City responded, and we're cutting tree limbs, fixing water leaks in homes. So it's been an amazing thing to see, and the citizens are seeing the results of communicating with somebody who historically they didn't really trust.
Right. And here's a big question. How much of this do you think is related to just sort of our societal inequality and lack of access to services? Joe?
I think a lot of it is that, and a lot of it is, some of it is lack of communication about what's available, but some of it is back to something that Chris said earlier, and that is having this richness of resources in our city, but not everyone knowing about that richness or having access to that richness, which then becomes an equity matter. And when we talk about our 2040 city plan and the essential part of interwoven equity, that's really got to be our first question always. Is this an equitable program? Are we delivering these resources in an equitable way so that everyone has information about these things and is able to access them in appropriate ways?
Right, and we've got a few minutes left, and right on the heels of what you just said, how do we kind of keep this from being seen as this is an other people problem? How do we make people recognize that it's all of our problem?
We're constantly pushing that message, from our unit, and every time we speak to people in the community, we want to empower you. If you live in Northwest, Southwest, Southeast, Northeast, and we're there in your community, who are your community leaders that we can empower to try to make you guys have a consistent voice, that we can link someone to services to address whatever needs you have in the community? And it's a we thing. It isn't a police thing. It isn't a city manager thing. We all have to work together, communicate, and we'll let you know what we can provide. You let us know what you need, and we'll meet in the middle somewhere.
This sounds like just such a monumental task. And how are you all taking care of yourselves in terms of, like, you're out there seeing some things that are pretty hard to see, and also dealing with statistics and people who are living a hard truth right now. Joe, what advice do you have to people in terms of like keeping yourself in a position where you can be helpful?
Well, I think we need to be kind to ourselves, and we need to honor ourselves and how we care for ourselves. This work is exhausting, and it's because it's traumatic. It's draining. It brings a fatigue with it to the whole city, and yet I think through communicating what we are doing, what's proving to be effective, where we're going to see a difference in the next couple of years, to remind people that this is like a relationship. When you're working on a relationship and you're making changes in that relationship so it can be healthier, you're going to see the results of that, some very shortly, but some over time. And that's really the crux of this work that we're doing.
Great. And I think we could talk for a lot longer, but I'd like to thank both Joe and Chris for joining me today. If you'd like more information or would like to get involved, we'll put a website up on the screen. And in this effort to curb gun violence, I'm sure they'd appreciate the help. For What It Takes, I'm Tom Landon.